And starting this hour, the eye in the sky is not welcome in Illinois. Illinois is saying not so fast when it comes to drones flying over their state. State legislators are putting on the table legislation that aims at limiting drones surveilling their citizens, as new light is shed on how privacy is compromised during drone activity. Turns out they're not the only state considering curtailing the use of drones over their skies. Now, Illinois is among 30 other states saying no thank you to drones flying over. Montana, California, and Oregon, among others, have submitted legislation designed to set up guidelines for drone use. Now, for more, I'm joined by Matthew Feeney, assistant editor at Reason 24/7. Matthew, hello.
Hi.
So, what's Illinois up to with this legislation? What's going on?
Well, I think that some of the Illinois state legislatures rightly want to make sure that when drones are used by law enforcement, that their privacy is secured.
Certainly. So, do you think that this expectation of privacy that people have may, in fact, be a thing of the past here?
Well, I certainly hope not. I think, American citizens really should feel that they have a right to privacy and that it should be protected by their legislatures. Unfortunately, it looks like, a lot of people in government and law enforcement seem a little too keen to disregard citizens' privacy in light of new technology.
Certainly. So, this bill would essentially require state agencies to obtain a search warrant before drones can collect any information. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think that is reasonable. Americans have the right to be secure in their property and their homes until they are suspected of a crime, in which case I think it's perfectly reasonable that a warrant should be served.
Certainly. So we're seeing a surge in drone activity, certainly, and states are attempting to regulate domestic drone activity. Many of them are aimed at requiring that warrant in order to justify their use. How does this benefit Americans? Like, why should we care?
We should care because we don't want a lot of drones buzzing around that are being used by law enforcement with feeble and sometimes weak excuses. I think it's totally reasonable that as American citizens we expect that there are good reasons for our privacy to be violated. And I think it is right that a lot of states have put forward this sort of legislation. Proposals that were put forward in Rhode Island required that drones not be weaponized and that warrants be served and that any new sort of model used by law enforcement was approved by an elected body like a town or city council or the governor, and I think that's a good step in the right direction.
Mm-hmm. So what are some of the excuses that we're seeing come out for drone use?
Well, I think it's important to keep in mind that there are instances where drones could potentially be used. So in the case of catching criminals who are on the run or after natural disasters. But the important thing to remember is that all these things can be made more excusable if there are laws that require that data not be retained. And I think that, a lot of states are rightly arguing for that sort of measure.
Certainly. So we're seeing certainly a lot of campaigns come out against drone activity in states. We just saw this in Virginia, with one town in particular. If Illinois is successful in getting this legislation passed and saying we don't want drones or we're going to limit, or in a sense, restrict their activity, how successful? I mean, are we going to see this across the board, or is this just going to, what type of trickling effect do you think this is going to have?
I mean, I'm not a fortune teller, I can't tell you for certain, but I think that we shouldn't be surprised if these sort of proposals become more and more common. It's not just law enforcement. We have to keep in mind that drones are probably going to become increasingly used for people as hobbies and part of professional things. So people might start using them for hunting, for example, and farmers and other people working in agriculture might want to use them. So we'll have to probably tackle those sort of issues as well.
I see. So going back to privacy issues, which are a main concern in the drone debate, certainly the Fourth Amendment, it guarantees the right of freedom from unreasonable search and seizure. Talk to me about how these drones, in effect, are violating that Fourth Amendment right that we have that expectation. Number one, that the expectation of privacy. Number two, that we have the right to be protected from this unreasonable searching, which many of us aren't aware of.
Well, I think it's sort of quite clear, isn't it? I think if you are, not doing anything wrong, that you should have the expectation that you are not going to be spied upon by law enforcement. It's not.
I see.
Yeah.
So, do you think that domestic drones in their present state are a violation of the Fourth Amendment?
Well, it depends where and when they're being used. I can't speak of every jurisdiction in the country, and I'm not,
Any specific cases that you can, possibly bring to light for us?
Where they have certainly been used
in violating unreasonable search and seizure or in privacy cases?
I can't name a specific instance because I'm not, an expert in every single jurisdiction in the country. But there are certainly cases out there where the legality is being seriously questioned.
Certainly. So, we've seen the federal government use these drones in patrolling borders, in Mexico and Canada, replacing essentially border agents on the ground. We've seen NASA use drones, tracking storms and such. Can you offer us any alternative, that the state could possibly be using other than these drones, which have serious privacy concerns attached to them? Maybe, kind of keeping the safety issue that we expect from the federal government in play without violating privacy. I guess my question is, are there other alternatives?
Well, you could, I suppose one way to do it would be put more boots on the ground on the borders to keep them secure, but I don't think that's actually absolutely necessary. You could use drones to patrol borders if there's very strong legal framework that makes sure that there isn't any data being retained or that weapons aren't being used. So I think the way to address this is that we perhaps will inevitably have to be using these sort of technologies, but only with the right legal framework in place.
Certainly. So can you give me an example of any legal framework that's currently in play?
Well, legal frameworks are difficult at the moment because it's a new technology and there aren't universal frameworks in place at the moment. It's something that's going to have to evolve over time.
Certainly. So do you anticipate a surge? You mentioned earlier that people would start using drones for hunting. Do you anticipate a surge in drone activity?
Yeah, the FAA predicts that there will be thousands of civilian-owned drones in the skies in the coming years, and they'll be used for many, many different things. And yeah, it is something that we should come to expect.
See, Matthew, thank you so much for the information. That was Matthew Feeney, assistant editor at Reason 24/7.